Greta recently in Norway, of all places, after her holiday trip across the Mediterranean Sea to go and pretend to give food to Gaza, even though there's no ports and nowhere to dock ships, with the flotilla that insisted that they were battered and bruised and beaten by the Israelis, but there's not a bruise in sight. The Israelis, who almost definitely filmed every second of their interactions with these lying human beings, has gone to Norway and has protested the building of a wind farm. Welcome and g'day. On this episode, conversion therapy. He can be she, but we can't pray for he to be he. We try and square the Indigenous circle in Australia. And is Chris Minns getting red pilled? All that and more on the Mark Pirotta Show. Before we get into what's been going on in Australia over the last couple of days, I think we need to speak about the imminent meeting between Anthony Albanese and Donald Trump in the coming days. Now, I personally believe that this is going to be a great watch. We've seen France, Nigeria, Congo, Britain, pretty much every major leader around the world getting absolutely grilled over the last 6 to 8 months. Now, albeit Australia's a tiny country, not in landmass, but in population. And as we are today, we are not the kind of country that is really doing much for anyone around the globe. We've reversed our position on the global stage, but could this be an opportunity for Anthony Albanese to get back in the good books with Donald Trump? I don't think so. Now, personally, I think that Anthony Albanese is honestly a decent bloke in terms of who he is as a person. Like, I'd have a beer with him. He's a good laugh, loves the footy, he's Aussie, he loves his mum, he's got a European background just like me. But as a leader, he's got no spine and he's entirely wrapped up by the left wing of his party. Anthony Albanese is the kind of guy who's never really done anything for anyone. He's lived his entire life in politics. His entire life has effectively been one big taxpayer-funded ride. Now, his story is pretty good. He came from a single mother household, raised himself up, but he's not the kind of bloke who ever really went out there and did anything. He effectively went straight into politics and hasn't spent a lot of time around real people. Now, Donald Trump is a real person. So are we going to see the smackdown of the century, or is Trump going to take it easy on him? I don't see Donald Trump taking it easy on him. Albanese, not even 3 years ago, basically roasted Donald Trump in front of the world. Now, obviously in his mind, Anthony thought to himself that Trump was done. I think the whole world thought Trump was done. But he's not, and he wasn't. I can't see that if Donald Trump's going to bring up videos to a prime minister of a genocide that is happening in his country right to his face, that he wouldn't do the same thing to Anthony Albanese and bring up all the terrible stuff he's said to him right to his face, right there in the middle of the Oval Office. I can't wait to see it. I'm looking forward to seeing it. But until then, let's get into some news. The coalition is pressing for fuel excise cut reintroductions amid fuel prices hitting an average of $2.39 per litre nationwide. Now, this is a stark reminder that Labor's economic policy when it comes to energy is absolutely dire. Now, I understand short-term pain for long-term gain, but the long-term gain can't be 20, 30, 40 years away. We've also heard news updates that our green energy policy ideals have shifted out to 2040, potentially 2050. And it's only going to keep getting further and further pushed down the line. Where we are in Australia right now is in an economic position to really dig into some minerals, really dig into our rare earths, and really dig into the gas and natural gas that exists off our shores and on our shores. Is Labor going to do the right thing here and do a simultaneous build a fuel economy, build a non-renewables economy alongside a renewables economy, and create wealth for the Australian people that we need to get through the cost of living crisis that we're in today? The ACT is pushing to introduce transgender ideology to 8-year-olds. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, I can't really understand how you can simultaneously have a ban on conversion therapy. And conversion therapy, we're not talking old school electroshock, magnets on the brain, pumping electricity into people's brain. We're talking conversion therapy being defined as anything up to and including praying over someone, which I'd actually take as kind of like a double-edged sword. Like I like it in a way that they've banned it because they recognize the power of prayer and that prayer actually has physical ramifications for people and psychological ramifications for people, and that prayer can be so powerful as to be considered a physical conversion therapy. But at the same time, you can't hold, and this probably should have been kept for the corner of contradictions, but you can't hold the view that it's all right and dandy to teach kids about transgender ideology, which is an ideology that at the same time as you're telling them you can be anything you want, you can be an astronaut, you can be a scientist, you can be a politician, you could be Prime Minister of Australia someday, you can be anything you want, and if you're a boy, you can be a girl, and then simultaneously hold the view that it's not okay to pray over someone, or, and here's the hard part, if a kid doesn't want to feel that way, and not just kids, anyone, doesn't want to feel the way that they're feeling right now, and they say, hey, like, I don't like these thoughts, I can't take that kid and say, hey, if you don't want to feel that way, let's take you to a psychologist. Let me pray over you. Let me say a prayer on your behalf that you find clarity, that you find reality. Doesn't make sense in my head. And then the rest of the news in Australia has effectively been crime. It's been a stabbing in Melbourne from an individual who is or was on bail and has now been remanded into custody. And an even worse portion to that story is that we've come to realize that it didn't happen yesterday, as Jacinta Allen and the Victorian Police brought out. On the Victorian Police website, it's listed as the top item under breaking news. This happened 2 weeks ago. The video has been being played in Taiwan for 2 weeks, and we in Australia have learnt about it yesterday. On Thursday, that's when we learn about a stabbing in our streets from someone who was on bail. Now, Jacinta Allen is under all sorts of pressure at the moment. Her machete bins are effectively useless. I mean, the idea that criminals are going to walk up to a bin and put a machete away is insane logic. It's the same insane logic that led to all of our guns being taken away. And I'm not a big gun guy, right? Never shot a gun, nothing in my life. But the people who give up the weapons aren't the bad guys. The people who give up the weapons are the good guys. And so old Mitch, who has a farm, right, now has to give up his machete because some 15-year-old teenagers, who are all immigrants, by the way, have decided that they're going to come here into our country buy up a bunch of machetes and go on a hacking spree in the streets of Melbourne. It's not isolated to Melbourne and Victoria, but it's the majority of where it's coming from. In other news, New South Wales has released new statistics that now 12 people, 12 Indigenous individuals have died in prison, sparking a whole new spate of laws, research, and in-depth investigation into how this is happening. Now, if we're going to look at the statistics properly, we don't actually know for sure how these 12 individuals died. I don't understand how we don't know that yet, but it's been raised effectively by the coroners who are dealing with these deaths. But if we're taking statistics from the past to now, about 40% of those are likely to be suicide. Another 40 to 50% are likely to be some sort of medical or natural causes. One of them has been listed as a potential spider bite, which seems a little bit ludicrous to me for grown men, or at least it seems like they're all grown men, to be killed by a spider bite. But we'll see what the news brings out. And the other news that's come out recently is that domestic violence is back on the rise, specifically in New South Wales. Now, I remember very clearly as a kid that domestic violence was effectively the topic. I mean, we were in church praying for the reduction of domestic violence cases. We had speakers come to the church during homily time or just after Mass where we do some announcements and community announcements, and we'd get we'd have at that time we had politicians' videos pop up on our screens talking about domestic violence, and it was a massive thing, probably 15, maybe 16, 17 years ago. And all of a sudden it's popping back up. Now, it's one of these things that I think to myself, I'm like, how do you stop that? You know, I mean, if we're looking and tying it back in with the Aboriginals in committing suicide in jail, right? I mean, not the majority, it seems 20% of all domestic violence cases seem to be Indigenous or Aboriginal involved perpetrators. Now, that is a 20% of all of those crimes from 3% of the population, right? So the plurality of people who commit domestic violence are still non-Indigenous. But there seems to be a specific problem within the Indigenous community. Now, I did some looking into it just to understand how and why. And obviously there's a rurality element to it, right? Where people are just so far away, it's hard to get services out to them. And this is where I want to try and square this circle. And this is probably going to be something for someone who's a bit more learned in this topic to probably jump on. And I'd love to have a chat with someone who potentially understands this issue a lot better than I do. But from my understanding, the entire purpose of the Australian government's input into Indigenous and Aboriginal life is effectively us saying, hey, we'll throw money at the problem. The money never works. And when the money never works, they basically say, hey, we need more money. And then simultaneously tell us that we're colonizers and we shouldn't be giving them money and we should just leave them alone. And I'm trying to find a way to square this circle right now. I mean, by population, by per 100,000 population right now in Australia, it is 7 times more likely that a criminal will be Aboriginal than any other race in Australia. It is 14 times more likely, a criminal within a domestic violence context. It is 14 times more likely that they will be a criminal outright, any sort of crime. And digging into those numbers, because I wanted to caveat, I was like, this doesn't make sense. Is this really raw? Is this good data? What are the caveats here? What are the straw mans to this argument? And it seems like there really aren't any. Again, there's a rurality element, but the crimes that are being committed aren't crimes of poverty. At a majority, the crimes are crimes of violence. There's a term that's being used that is intent to commit harm to another person. That seems to be about 30 to 40% of crime across the nation. committed by Indigenous populations. There's another 40% which is dedicated to other violent crimes. And then there's car thefts, drug abuse. It was interesting to me, actually. The majority of crimes committed by non-Indigenous populations is drug abuse. So it seems like possession or dealing seems to be the highest among non-Indigenous, which I'd never known before. So that's an interesting little number. How do we fix that? I really want an actual solution. The main solution that I tend to hear is white people leave, get out of those communities. And I mean, I agree that'll reduce reporting on crime because we won't be there to actually stop these things from happening. But then we're going to get more domestic violence. We won't see it, so things will be a bit more palatable. Okay, we've left. And then what? Do we just leave them alone? And then they're living in squalid conditions? How do we get to a point where we can say, we're happy with these numbers? Hey, this is a good result for the Indigenous population of Australia. Do we need more representation? Because the people who are representing, maybe outside of Lydia Thorpe, but the people who are representing, I mean, Jacinta Price is probably the highest level of any Indigenous representing politician within the Australian government right now. Now, she's not in power, but she's probably the most outspoken voice. And everyone calls her a white shill. So it's like, if you live a life that is congruent with Western values and Australian values, then you're considered a white shill. But if you don't, and you end up living the life of an Indigenous Aboriginal as is culturally specific or correct, then you're 14 times more likely to commit a crime, and you are 7 times more likely to commit domestic violence. And so I've got to find a way to square this circle in my own mind, because to me, the Indigenous story is a beautiful story in terms of a fight of struggle. You know, there's some amazing art that comes out. I mean, one of my earliest memories is a camp that I did when I was in high school. And there's this gorgeous Aboriginal artwork. I worked for an Indigenous company for a while in my early 20s. And they're a client of mine. And I think that there are so many beautiful things that we can garner from all cultures. Bring it into that melting pot, right? But the values and the legal system that exists to create barriers against crime and against issues that allow that cultural diversity to exist, they still need to be followed. And so we can keep screaming that it's the supremacist culture forever, but I don't see how we get to a point now where, is it more money? Is it less money? Is it more influence? Is it less influence? Obviously, we've tried some terrible things in the past with the stolen generation. Again, probably a controversial take on that one, but I think it was a good idea that went terribly wrong. I don't think you can take kids from a family and pretend like you're going to do anything decent, obviously, but I don't think that there are many people in their heads who think I'm going to go do something evil right now and that my intention is evil. I think there are stupid ideas, which that was one of them, but you can't necessarily say, I'm going to go do something evil right now. Going to get roasted for that one. But how do we get to a point now where we are happy with the state of affairs in the Aboriginal community? And I'm open to suggestions. I'm open to roasting. If my numbers are wrong, let me know, because I need to get to the bottom of this, because an Australia for all Australians needs to be for all Australians. And that doesn't mean that we're going to have, 17 Chinatowns and 14 Vietnam towns and 100 or 256 Aboriginal towns. We're going to be Australia for Australia. We need to uplift the people who are here and get them to a successful place. What that success metric looks like might be different for everyone, but it's not 14 times the crime than their counterparts. It's not 7 times the amount of domestic violence than their counterparts. There has to be a better option for our fellow Australians. I was not expected to do that tangent. Chris Minns might be getting red-pilled. He has just announced a funding package for families, $180 million for family counselling, mental health, and domestic violence support. Now, I might be reading into this in a bit of a naive way, but I personally believe that when you throw money at families, it should be the nuclear family. It's statistically the best family. That is a very biased view, but it's a view that is based entirely in statistics. It's the family that built the world we live in today, the most peaceful world that this globe has ever seen. And so if we can fund that, I think we're going to go in the right direction. Chris Minns recently blocked the pro-Palestine march that was going to hit the Sydney Opera House steps. That did get overturned by the Supreme Court, which somehow is supreme over a constitution that has no laws in it. And it just decides what is right and what is wrong based off its own whims these days, because it doesn't have a common law foundational document that it refers back to, which is based upon a Christian doctrine. And so they just decide, oh, we like that. Oh, we don't like that. And somehow they're supreme justices. I mean, you look at the lineup on that Supreme Court of New South Wales. You know, how on earth are any of these people even lawyers, let alone Supreme Court justices? They probably aren't even lawyers. They're probably just random people they picked up out of nowhere and decided to say, hey, you can decide what the law is because we don't know. You probably know better than us, random person that we picked up. Probably kidding. I think they're all actually lawyers of some sort. But the point is, we don't have a law. Not really. We have tens of thousands of little legislations that all accumulate into one random regulatory guideline. And then it's backed up by a random tax code, which is its own set of laws, and then a BUDSM, which does all of our financial laws and the decisions that we can make within business. We don't actually have you can diss America all you want, but their constitution actually gives them a framework of people-decided laws. And then a Supreme Court over there or a High Court over there can go through the constitution and say, hey, the people voted for this because referendum style, you need to have a plurality of people who vote for a new law to go into the constitution and their entire legislative system. But we don't have anything like that here. We don't have a founding document that we can, pull information from. It's just, what am I feeling today? How do I feel today? Do I feel left? Do I feel right? What else has Chris Minns done? Chris Minns announced new funding to reduce domestic violence with a little hints into potentially actually digging into stats and numbers, which, funnily enough, in New South Wales is almost next to nothing. Now, the federal government has spent almost $2 billion on this issue over the course of the last 10 to 15 years. And we don't have a federal database of who's committing these crimes. Not broken down by any sort of real, metric, economic, socioeconomic, or at least not that I could find. The $2 billion, the problem's getting worse, and somehow we're supposed to trust these people with our federal dollars. And that's not a left-right issue. I mean, Scott Morrison wasn't right-wing, but it was a right-wing party, technically. Abbott's linked in there, and obviously now Albanese. And so I do feel like we've got to do better. I think there's a way to use data successfully. If you can find out who's committing the crimes, then you can figure out how best to tackle the issues. Where do you need to spend the money? Spend the money on the majority for once. Not on the minority. Not on the minority. That's how that word works. To me, it seems that minorities are a minority for a reason. And that's probably going to be one of the craziest things that I say, but minorities are a minority for a reason. We can continue uplifting these minorities and saying that, oh, we've got to keep them going. Endangered species, we've got to keep them all going. It's nice to have them, right? It is nice to have them. But at the same time, you can't keep throwing money at it, pretending like you're actually doing something good. As a general rule of thumb, minorities are a minority for a reason. That's probably self-inflicted, and they probably want it themselves. They don't want to be part of the collective. I mean, emo used to be a, underground cult thing. Cool, hip, like you were the cool guys who did this thing. Like, homosexuality used to be a minority, cool, hip thing. Now every third person you meet is homosexual. When you pull things in from the minority into the majority, one, they no longer become cool. And you no longer have that's edgy. We like that. Let's keep it around. And you start seeing that as a majority, maybe their ideas aren't that great. And that's why they were a minority to begin with. Now, minority ideas can become majority ideas and they can become brilliant. And hopefully this is a step in the right direction for the Min's government, who's getting hit left, right, and center at the moment. I mean, there's not much attacks on him coming from the right wing, if I'm being super honest. I mean, he's not doing a terrible job on infrastructure. He's doing a decent job on the economy. New South Wales is doing all right. If anything, he's getting hits from his own side. And so might we see Chris Minns get red-pilled? I don't know. But that's the news. That's Australia at the minute. I think the major news is definitely going to be Anthony Albanese's trip to America and Jim Chalmers having a go at pretending like he knows money in front of people who really know money. So next we'll dig into the cult of contradictions and hope you stick around for that. Today's contradiction. It has to be Greta. It just has to be Greta. So Greta recently in Norway, of all places, after her holiday trip across the Mediterranean Sea to go and pretend to give food to Gaza, even though there's no ports and nowhere to dock ships, with the flotilla that insisted that they were battered and bruised and beaten by the Israelis, but there's not a bruise in sight. The Israelis, who almost definitely filmed every second of their interactions with these lying human beings, has gone to Norway and has protested the building of a wind farm. So Green Greta, Greta the how dare you, has gone to Norway and said, you know what's more important than green energy and saving the planet from cataclysm? The green energy loving, pill hating, plastic hating person who is 99 to 100% sure that the world is about to end has protested a wind farm because of deer. Not Dear John, deer, the animal. Because there are migratory patterns that exist within a deer community that might potentially be disrupted by a wind farm. Now, this is something that conservatives have been talking about for a really long time. It's been a talking point because you got to hit them where it sounds good, right? Hit them where it would hurt them. The solar, and Donald Trump spoke about this and everyone gave him a hard time for it. The wind farms are disrupting whale migration. The wind farms are disrupting animal patterns. They're killing millions of birds a year because they spin so fast, and the birds think that they're sitting still, but they're actually not sitting still. They're actually moving pretty quick, and the birds don't measure themselves quite right. So they end up smashing into these wind turbines, causing damage which needs to be repaired by coal, metal, and minerals that are not green in plants that are not green. But at least they're creating energy that is green at about 10% of the rate that coal does. And so Greta definitely wins out this cult of contradictions, or contradiction corner. The chair's still there. We'll figure out if I get there. So the world's going to end because we're using too much fossil fuel. But you're more worried about the deer? Like, Norway's not that big. You can't just build wind farms in, a random spot that there's no animals. I mean, you go across in Australia today and you drive down south towards Victoria and you see wind farms. I mean, going into Canberra, I went there probably 6-7 months ago now. Going to Canberra, you cross one of the, and it looks magnificent. Don't get me wrong, magnificent. It's like the Ollivander quote, Harry Potter castle behind me. It's like the Ollivander quote. It's great, but terrible. It looks like human magnificence. It looks like humans dominating nature, but it's ugly. It is so ugly. It's not the pyramids that are these giant megalith structures in the middle of a desert that is just human incredible. It's an eyesore. You're crossing this beautiful lake on your left-hand side going down to Canberra, and then all of a sudden you pop out and there's just turbines everywhere. All across it, it's just wind turbines. And they make this almighty roar. You can't turn your windows down. You're going 110 down the freeway, and somehow the wind turbines are still louder. I digress. Greta Thunberg believes the world is about to be destroyed, and she's more worried about deer. Like, I see people who are respected members of Congress, Parliament, maybe not respected, but they're in Congress, in Parliament, touting this girl as if she's some sort of regional genius. And yet she simultaneously holds two views that cannot be congruent with each other. Even her little pivot for the last 18 months into going up against Israel. So the war in the Middle East was more important than global cataclysm. Global cataclysm. And I understand the pictures that you saw out of Israel and Gaza are shocking. War is always shocking. But we're talking global cataclysm, war in Gaza. Don't you think global cataclysm is probably a little bit more pressing? This is what happens when we let kids dictate policy. This is what happens, and hey, we can tie in the other contradiction. This is what happens when you think that kids have the same level of intelligence as adults, who have learnt about a topic for their entire lives, spent their lives dedicated to the understanding of certain topics. But a kid who gets up in front of the UN and says, "How dare you?" and everyone starts weeping and this girl's incredible. And somehow she understands more than everyone else on Earth. And we give 8-year-olds the ability to start hormonally transitioning. And by the time they turn 12 or 13, we'll start putting them on puberty blockers. If they're girls, even earlier. Girls are now starting to, because of the plastics that Greta hates so much, hit puberty a lot earlier. And once a woman starts hitting puberty, it's very difficult to reverse that successfully. And so you've got to do it by about 9 or 10 for it to be fully effective. And then by the time they turn 18 and their brains have fully developed and they want to transition back, they're now infertile because their sexual reproductive organs haven't been able to fully grow. But if I pray for that person, I'm a criminal. There is an ideology in this world, and it is toxically feminine. We've spoken about toxic masculinity for so long, but it is toxically feminine. It is the overbearing mother that Jordan Peterson speaks about that says, if you're crying, I've got to change what I'm doing. If dad gets angry at you for doing something wrong, then dad's probably in the wrong. And so Greta Thunberg is today's contradiction. Before we jump into 50 states in 5 minutes, we're going to take a quick listen to Jim Chalmers today discussing what he's going to be talking about and who he's going to be talking to over the next week. I think you might find it interesting, one of the states that he's deciding to go to, and I wonder who he'll be meeting with while he's there. Let's take a listen.
And so the purpose of my engagements over the course of the next week or so are, first of all, to engage with colleagues and counterparts from the G20, the IMF, the World Bank, and in Korea next week in Seoul at APEC. The second purpose is to engage with American friends in advance of Prime Minister Albanese's meeting with President Trump here in Washington, D.C. next week. And thirdly, to promote Australia as an investment destination. And I'll be doing that particularly in New York City over the course of the next couple of days. This is a time of great uncertainty. It's a time of great opportunity for Australia. We have so much of what the world...
That's enough. So, if you don't know, New York is currently having a mayoral race where they are expected to bring in probably the most radical socialist that has ever run for any political office. Probably not run, but at least run with a shot of winning in America. Zoran Mamdani is, without a doubt, the biggest wolf in sheep's clothing that I have ever seen. Now, like many people who are on the extreme left, their policies seem so soft and so loving and like they are looking out for the little guy. But we've tried them everywhere and they never work. Free busing, community shops, government-funded grocery stores, they just don't work. They don't work for the poor people who exist in the space right then and there. They work for the people who want to take advantage of those systems. When you promote the lowest possible cost, you are going to get the lowest possible people come in to take advantage of it. And that's not everyone, because there are some incredible people who really need help. But as a general rule of thumb, if you are reducing costs to almost nothing, then the people who are going to take advantage of that at a plurality are not going to be the people who really need it. We see that all the time. I mean, it's the reason USAID was such a failure, right? It's not because the idea behind it was not kind. It's because the people who end up as the middlemen and the people who end up taking advantage of the goodwill of the system end up ruining that system. And so I've said this probably 1,000 times to people in my life, but the only form of socialism, communism, equitable economy that exists in the world today, the only successful one that has ever existed, is the Catholic Church and probably some other churches across America. Because whenever you have a centralized form of government that dictates price and policy down the chain, you end up with corruption. Now, in our faith, our leader is God. And so you can't really, God can't be corrupt, at least in our worldview. Men can corrupt his vision or can corrupt what they perceive to be his vision. And we've seen that across pretty much every religion across all of human history. But the basic precepts of the beliefs forbid you in the long term from being able to break away from the structure that is created under the Catholic faith. And so Jim Chalmers going to New York specifically to go and decide to do some sort of economic engagement with a socialist after going to Asia where the majority of the countries there are all socialist countries, and then going back to meet up with very likely Zoran Mamdani, who will very likely be the next mayor of New York, to garner investment, seems like it's not going to be a very good policy for Australians, at least not on the capitalist front, not on the wealth building front. We will see what happens, but I don't see it ending well for the Australian people. Donald Trump has had a shortlist leaked. I think that was probably intentional. He wants to scare the life out of the people who are currently shutting down the government. He is going to be stacking the bench with conservative voices over the next couple of months and years as Supreme Court seats become available. Now, Supreme Court seats can only really be vacated in two ways. It's death, which tends to be the case at the moment. We recently saw a senator, I believe it was Mitch McConnell, falling over. And it's not the first time he's been caught on camera. Not steps or anything, just walking and just collapses. These people stay there till they die. They've got no stake in the future of the country. Not really in any real sense. Their minds are all going away. We had a president for 4 years effectively fall over every 5 minutes and his brain turned off. And so Donald Trump is legacy building. He's creating a backbench ready to go for when the next person falls too hard or decides that they are done with realizing that the Constitution is not actually a plaything for left-wing ideology. It is deeply rooted in conservative and Christian values, and trying to break away from those things causes a system of governance that has withheld time in one of the most volatile political eras ever to exist. And the world is going to come to the conclusion, I think pretty soon, especially in the wake of Charlie Kirk's death, that politics outside of Christianity leads to a corruption that cannot be withheld. It's the only real country that has stuck around in its original form or close to for 250 years. Britain is unrecognizable. Australia never had a government to begin with. Not really. We have a fake governing body that is loyal to the Queen somehow, a million miles away. And so I think this is great. This is brilliant. I think he's taken a bit of a break, honestly. America's been pretty chilled out over the last week or so. There's escalating tariff wars with China as per usual, and this is far past 5 minutes. And so I'll leave it at that. You can go and check out all the news that is happening. Donald Trump did threaten to go into Gaza and eradicate Hamas himself, which, if that happens, is going to be insane. I think if troops hit Gazan soil, there is going to be absolute bedlam in the streets of every country because they'll think that the next great takeover is happening. But Hamas is killing people on live stream because they are dissenting against Hamas. And most of them seem to be the leaders or party members of a alternate party that could possibly take over government once Hamas is officially booted out. So we'll see how that all plays out. But for the meantime, Donald Trump's keeping a pretty low profile, hopefully gaining energy to roast Albanese. I'm starting a news segment today, just while I'm going down my rabbit holes, I'm finding budgetary stuff, which is just a whole lot of fun, and seeing where all the money's going. And so I'm doing a big deep dive investigation at the moment into a housing budget over in the Northern Territory, but that'll come out at a later date when I get some more information. But for the time being, it's not a huge number, but it is enough to make me lose my mind. The federal government is spending $12 million on lived experience advisory panels. And so $12 million to listen to people talk about their individual lived experience. And they think that's going to do something. Now, I have a personal understanding of how these sorts of things work out because projects that have been run in the past in and around me and involving me have included case studies on individual people. And they just don't work because everyone's different. And so there's a shared common understanding of how things work. But when you start digging into the nitty-gritty of people's lived experience, then what are you gaining? I get to hear a story about your life, which could be very interesting. You might have been through some awesome stuff. You might have been through some terrible things that you got through. Or you might have gone through terrible things that you are still using as an excuse for all the reasons that your life has failed so far. Not a single life is without its strife. Everyone goes through problems. So spending $12 million, the federal government, your taxpayer money, to listen to sub stories of life experience or lived experience seems a little bit ludicrous to me. What's the objective? What's the point? What are we actually gaining from hearing someone's story? Over a dinner party, that sounds great, but I'm spending, $30, $40 for a nice steak, not $12 million. In a later episode, we're going to go through the Northern Territory, as I discussed earlier, and the housing that has been going on there, but a little bit of a tidbit in that. It seems as though the government is planning on spending about $1.4 to $1.6 million per home for 260 homes per year over the next 10 years. Now, this is something that has actually started about a year ago. And in the first year, it seems like they built about 200 plus, at least from the documents they've released. Local affiliates and local members are saying that about 120 around about homes have been built or refurbished in the first year of this program. I'll be diving deeper into that and having a look at what the government is spending our money on. Now, this housing deal is specifically for Aboriginal communities, which I think is necessary, because if you ever want to take a look and see what Aboriginal housing looks like in the Northern Territory, it is inhumane. It is not a housing situation that is built for modern Australia. Now, again, are we taking a step too far? Are we westernizing groups of people who do not want to be westernized? Are we building $1.4 million homes for people who don't want to live in $1.4 million homes with a concrete slab under their feet that stops them from being connected to the earth that they claim to own? So I think those questions do need to be asked, and it's the main reason why I voted no on the voice referendum, because if you ask one tribal elder and you ask another tribal elder what they think the color of the sky is, each of them will tell you a different answer. There is no way to create a centralized voice for 256 different language-speaking groups of human beings. And so spending billions of dollars over the next 10 years to build housing, costing $1.4 million per house. I live in a 5-bedroom that cost about $200,000 to build. Now, I don't necessarily think that the government's going to be paying top dollar for the land, unless they plan on paying $1.2 million per unit to build housing for the Aboriginal community over there. That doesn't seem realistic to me. It might be that there are no services in that area, and so they need to invest in infrastructure to get water and electricity there. But the bill is being touted as an expansion of current housing to reduce a housing crisis in that area. And so we'll see how that all unravels, and hopefully I can dig a little bit deeper. I can tell you that local businesses in the exact same location where Anthony Albanese announced this last year has gone bust. The business was employing 30 or around about 30 employees in the local area and has since gone bust, quoting, "not enough government contracts." Now, I've tried to reach out to the liquidators to see if I can get some more information. They did give me a call back, and I sent an email out to them. And I'm not using this as a journalistic opportunity, which I wasn't at the time, and I still don't intend necessarily to. And I won't name the company. But if you look up Binjari, then you'll see Binjari announcement. Anthony Albanese's face will pop up. You watch that video, and the local community business that was building homes and repairing homes for local residents has since gone bust. It was a company that was running for 15 years and has somehow lost money to be able to maintain its workers since billions of dollars have been invested into the region. And Anthony Albanese stood on the community steps, and no homes have been built in that community since. So I'd love to understand how that all works. And that's the end of diving into the dollars. Thanks for listening into this episode. I hope you enjoyed all of that. There are going to be some more segments that are going to be added in and around things that I find that I enjoy talking about. At some point, I'll be doing a mild comedy skit version of certain things and trying to have a laugh while doing things, because I think you need to. The world isn't all bad, and having a laugh about things that you shouldn't have a laugh about is half the fun of being alive. It's been an interesting episode. I hope you really enjoyed it. I am just starting out, so if you can follow me or like stuff, leave comments. Definitely leave comments if you like things, don't like things, want to ask me some questions. I will read them, at least until / if things start becoming a little bit more intense, and I might need my kids to jump on and answer some questions because I won't be able to get through all of them. Yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the episode. I'm Mark Pirotta, and this has been the Mark Pirotta Show.